I am just delighted to introduce Gary Noesner to everyone. Just like our two previous speakers and Dr. Hotez, he's got a very extensive background. So just to give you a little bit of information about Gary, Gary retired from the FBI in 2003 following a 30-year career as an investigator, instructor, and negotiator. A significant focus of his career was directed toward investigating Middle East hijackings in which American citizens were victimized. In addition, he was an FBI hostage negotiator for 23 years and retiring as the chief of the FBI's Crisis Negotiation Unit Critical Incident Response Group, and he was the first person to hold that position. In that capacity, he was heavily involved in numerous crises incidents covering prison riots, right-wing militia standoffs, religious zealot sieges, terrorist embassy takeovers, and airplane hijackings. He has appeared in numerous television documentaries about hostage negotiation, terrorism, and kidnapping, produced by a wide variety of television outlets. And today, Gary is going to speak about from conflict to cooperation. So you may ask, well, why do we have a former FBI hostage negotiator on this call? He has worked with people with differing opinions, just like we work with people and constituents with different opinions. So Gary will have a lot of insight onto how to deal with conflict and then get to a place where we can all cooperate. So I will turn the call over to Gary.
Thank you, Rick. I appreciate it. And actually, I had to make a small correction. My last name is pronounced Noesner. It's just a silent O. Everybody gets it wrong, so it's no big deal. But it's a pleasure to be with you today.
My apologies.
That's okay. I applaud the advocacy that you're all engaged in. I think it's particularly important in these polarized times, as Dr. Hotez was talking about the difficulties in dealing with people with very strong emotion. And I think the things that I'm going to talk about briefly here, certainly I think complement what Jamie said as well as Lori. And what I've learned is that as human beings, we're social animals, and we need cooperation to function properly, to exist, to be successful in whatever we do, particularly the advocacy work that you all do. How do we do that? When we have a polarized situation with strongly divergent views? Well, I learned some things from 30 years in the FBI about negotiations. And if the techniques that we developed and refined work in life and death situations, then surely they have a decent chance of helping you be more successful in perhaps less physically dangerous situations that you might confront. And one of the things I think is important to keep in mind is when people have very strong feelings about something, they're anti-vaxxers, whatever it might be, they're saying loudly they want to be heard, they want to be understood. And what we have to do if we want to try to have some influence on them is we have to first earn the right to be of influence. And we earn the right through demonstrating that we hear them. It doesn't mean we agree with them or that we think their position is correct. It just means that we're acknowledging their point of view. And when you do that, it's the best pathway towards success. In strong emotional situations, there is no guarantee that if you do these 4 things or these 5 things, you'll always get the person to cooperate. I can't promise you that, and I don't believe anybody else can either. But if you are going to be successful, it's certainly not going to be by arguing or attacking. You just have to take some time. In the hostage situations I used to respond to, after doing it for 30 years, and for those interested, I chronicle that in my book, Stalling for Time, and talk about a lot of different incidents and how we got to where we got in the negotiation business. But I could pretty much tell pretty early what it would take to convince somebody to get to a point to come out peacefully. But what was required was some time and some effort. I couldn't just say, listen, sir, I've been through hundreds of these things. And here's what's going to happen. We're going to talk for 3 hours. And eventually you're going to burn off all the steam. You're going to start thinking a little bit more rationally, and you're going to be more amenable to the things I suggest, and you're going to surrender. So why don't we just do it now? Well, that'll save us all a lot of trouble. Well, you can't take those shortcuts. You just have to earn the right. And the best way I can illustrate that, and I think all of you will be familiar with the childhood teeter-totter, and I'll just use my hands to demonstrate it. And when one side's up, the other side has to be down. So if we start off in a situation that involves high emotion, the bottom end of that teeter-totter is rational thinking and behavior. And I would defy anybody to argue that that's not the case. What you first have to do as a communicator is work on lowering the emotional content of our engagement. And you see what happens when you do that. As emotions lower, rational thinking and rational behavior begins to increase. That's our objective. And we have to do that through a number of ways. The business guru Stephen Covey says, first seek to understand and then be understood. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. And we do that through active listening skills in the negotiation profession. We stole them lock, stock, and barrel from mental health counseling field. And they're ways of acknowledging people's point of view and demonstrating, not just merely saying you hear them, but demonstrating you hear and understand them. And there's really two essential ingredients. And I hope these will be two of your most important takeaways. You might want to jot them down. But when we engage in active listening, we're essentially doing two things. We're doing a restatement of content, using my words, paraphrasing, summarizing what I've heard from the other person. You don't like vaccines because you think they put poisons in your body and they cause diseases and da-da-da-da-da-da. Again, it's not saying I agree with them or think their perspective is correct. I'm just saying I hear what you have to say about it. And the second part is a reflection of emotions. And you feel as though that people that try to get you to take vaccines are violating your rights and they're causing stress in your life, whatever it might be. So you think about those two things in every form of communication, not just in the work that you do, but probably your day-to-day, everyday life. If we can let someone know we understand the specifics of what they're talking about, the story, and we tell it back in our own words, and also the feelings that surround that. It's like the old M&M candy that was developed in World War II for the soldiers. There's a chocolate center and there's a candy coating on the outside. So always think of the M&M candy. The chocolate is the story of what happened to them or what the issue is that they feel passionate about. The candy coating is their emotions that wrap around that story. It's not what happens to us in life, it's how we feel about it. And we have to keep that in mind. Now, being rational and appropriate and considerate and thoughtful and listen carefully to somebody doesn't say, oh, you're right, Gary. Now all of a sudden I realize that vaccines are good. I think I'll join your team. It's not going to happen like that. But you're looking for an opportunity to treat someone respectfully with dignity and to have them respond to you in kind so that we create an atmosphere for a calm, thoughtful discussion that may lead to change. For most of us, I mean, if you picked 100 people and 50 of them were pro-life and 50 of them were pro-choice, and you put them in a conference hall and they sat there all night long, at the end of the night, probably 50 people would come out and be pro-life and 50 people would come out and be pro-choice. You're probably not going to change a lot of opinions, but if you can engage with the other side in a thoughtful, calm, considerate, genuine manner, you stand more likely to be successful. All the hostage situations I worked, I would always get in the habit of asking somebody, what is it that I said that made you decide to surrender peacefully? The answer was always the same, and it's really one that'll surprise you. It's not what you said, it's how you said it. Well, think about the power of that. How we come across as communicators, not just the words we say, but our body language, our facial gestures, our show of interest and concern and genuineness. You essentially want to be likable and trustworthy. People want to do business with, work with people they like and respect and feel they get that in response. So think about earning the right to be of influence. I start each chapter of my book with a quote. And the one I like the most is a partial quote from Rudyard Kipling. And it basically says, if you can keep if you can keep your emotions about you when all else are losing theirs, keep your head about you when all else are losing theirs. And what that means is self-control is the most powerful tool we all have. People ask me what makes a good negotiator. Are they good talkers? Are they good bullshitters? Whatever. I said, no, they're people that can exercise a lot of self-control, who keep their head about them in a calm situation. Back in 1985, before a lot of you came along, I worked at TW-847 hijacking, a very infamous hijacking in the Middle East involving a TWA plane, American plane, and mostly American passengers. And I recall back then I interviewed some passengers and I said, now, the second landing of Beirut, what happened? And there would be a particular passenger that would say, well, I was in seat 23A. I was there for 15 minutes. Then they moved me to seat 40B. I sat next to so-and-so. We were there for about 45 minutes. Da, 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 da. Very detailed, very specific. And I would ask somebody else that in real life had sat next to that person. And I would say, can you tell me what happened in Beirut on the second landing? And they would say something like, we landed in Beirut twice? I can't even remember. And it shows you how some people, not surprisingly, react in a very strong, visceral way to emotionally challenging situations. And if that causes them to lose their self-control and their ability to think and receive information clearly, it's a huge impediment to success. So I think Lori mentioned this before. You're going to be inclined. She said she had a temper. I mean, we all do. Sometimes you want to tell somebody, you're full of crap. Where are you getting this? I mean, I have an old high school friend on Facebook, and I saw something today that almost gave me an aneurysm. The most outrageous political thing, and you can guess where it comes from or what it's about. But I just said, what could she possibly be smoking? And my first inclination was, I'm going to send her an email telling her she's crazy, but you can't. It's not going to do any good. It doesn't help anything, and you have to realize there are certain people in your life. There are certain people you're going to deal with that a good strategy is sometimes to disengage and walk away. It's just a fruitless effort. And that doesn't mean you failed. It just means that this person is probably unreachable. However, most of the people you deal with, even those on the other side of whatever the argument is that you're making, if you're polite and thoughtful and demonstrate that you want to understand more about what they've been through and how they feel about things, it's really going to help you to be successful. I do a lot of public speaking, and I've been telling the story for the last couple of years. I went to Memphis, Tennessee, and I'm in a hotel. I've got to give a speech the next day, and I go to the bar. I don't like room service, and I don't like to sit in a restaurant by myself. So I go to the bar, and I have a glass of wine and a steak and talk to the bartender. But I always have a target du jour, and that is whoever happens to sit next to me is my target. And my target is to learn everything I can about that person. And it's a fun little game I play. So I'm there in a bar, and this guy walks up, and he's got medical scrubs on. And I said, excuse me, sir. And he's in a real rush to get a drink. And I said, excuse me, sir, I couldn't help but notice you have medical scrubs. Are you a doctor? He said, no, I'm not a doctor. I said, well, I was just wondering why you had the scrubs on. He said, well, I'm a medical device salesman. So I kind of turned my body more towards him. And I said, really? What sort of medical devices? Well, I do artificial knees and artificial elbows and da, 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 da. I said, well, can you tell me more about that? Well, to make a long story short, Jim, was married X number of years to Mary. I know his kids' names. I know where he lives. I know how passionate he is about his work. And he tells me somewhere along the line that he goes into the reason he's wearing scrubs, he goes into the emergency room and shows doctors how to install these devices. And, as Dr. Hotez exemplifies, we place doctors pretty high on our social pecking order of achievement. And so I said, so you teach doctors how to do things. And you could see him stand up a little straighter and got a little more confidence. And, by the end of an hour, I knew so much about Jim's life. And I said, Jim, it's been amazing talking to you. I've learned all kinds of interesting things. And I'm just fascinated by what you do. And he said, what was your name again? I said, oh, my name's Gary Noesner. And he said, well, what, what do you do? I said, I'm retired. I was the chief hostage negotiator for the FBI. And they just walk away. And I kind of look in the mirror and I see he's looking at me like, gee, maybe he could have learned an interesting story or two as well. But the point is, people like to talk about themselves. They like to talk about things that they feel are important and are passionate. Give them the opportunity to do that. Don't be in a rush to convince them of the error of their thinking. Um, I think Dr. Peter touched on it. I mean, so many people, it seems these days, get their information from limited sources and they tend to validate what they already think. So that's a tough nut that you have to crack. There are people, and I'll share this with you. I have a family member who's an anti-vaxxer, and that's not going to change. We've opened up that discussion. I've tried to be very thoughtful and learn more about it, but it's pretty clear to me that I'm probably not going to convince that individual in my family to change their mind, and I'm okay. I'll just live with that. But it's really challenging when you feel very confident about something and you find that the person you're dealing with seems to have bad information, and it's tough. You want to straighten them out. But I will tell you, attacking someone, criticizing someone, belittling someone is never the way to do it. When we had the recent social unrest in the United States going back a couple of months and protests in the streets over the police brutality situation, there were a lot of my conservative friends and from law enforcement that were very critical, looters and rioters. And I said, well, when people feel motivated to go out in the street and carry signs and march down the street, what they're saying is we want to be heard. There's something that's important to us, and we want you to listen to us. So the best way you deal with them is not beat them over the head with a baton, but to provide an opportunity so that you can hear what they have to say. Now, that's not a guarantee that some people won't misbehave, but it's a way to deflect anger and frustration. And if we're successful in opening up a workable dialogue, that's the pathway through which it will happen. So it's something that for some people it comes natural, for others you have to work at it. And unfortunately, for some people, you're probably best letting someone else on the team. I think Lori was talking about having your team set up. Maybe this isn't the role this particular person on your team should play. They just don't have the self-discipline for that. But those are some of the things, that I think are really, really important. I just think listening is the cheapest concession we can make. It's so cheap. And, even as a parent, I have 3 grown kids and 7 grandchildren, and I tear up every time I hear the song Cats in the Cradle. Why? Because it's a song about a man's son who keeps coming to him for some of his father's time. And the dad says, later on, I got to do this first. And then later on, when the man's old and he wants his son's time, the son gives him the same thing. I'm sorry, Dad, I'm all busy now. I can't come back. And what it tells us all, whether it's in our personal lives or if it's in our work, or whatever it is, and it doesn't have to be an adversarial, it could be people you work with, your subordinates, your superiors at work, your friends, neighbors, whatever. Try to take the time to listen to what they have to say and acknowledge it. It's a powerful, powerful tool. Sometimes, I'm sure you've all been there, you've gone to a social function with your significant other and everybody hangs out in the kitchen and your wife's in the dining room with another group of people. And at the end of the night, you get together and you say, hey, did you get to meet so-and-so? No, I didn't really have a chance to talk to them, but well, they just moved to the area and there's something about it, just the nicest people. I think we should ask them over for dinner. Now, what was it? It might be very hard to articulate what it was that you liked about that person, but what you probably liked was they were respectful, they listened to you, they asked questions about your life, you responded in kind. And there's a certain likability, it's the Supreme Court justice said, I can't define pornography, but I know it when I see it. And I think, oddly as it sounds, it's the same way with likability. I have a hard time defining it, but I sure know it when I see it. And that's what you want to be if you want to be effective. And I know Lori was talking a lot about, and Jamie as well, dealing with these politicians and being advocates. I mean, you can go in there and point your finger at them and yell at them and tell them they're idiots, and you're probably dead in your tracks before you start. I think you have to work really hard, sometimes bite your tongue to try to be respectful and to listen to what they have to say. And, and then in a genuine way say, I have some thoughts I'd like to share with you. Do you think we could talk about this some more? Or could I meet with your legislative assistant on this piece of legislation? Because I think there's some aspects of this that you may not be fully aware of that we'd like to share with you. And, these are things that effective communicators do to create relationships of trust that hopefully bear fruit. Again, I've read a lot of negotiation business books, gurus that tell you do these 5 things and you'll always get this result. And this is guaranteed to do this. And by and large, I think that's a bunch of nonsense. I mean, but everything's about relationship. Just focus on the relationship and building, sustaining that. And I think you'll be successful. I mean, I've talked with people wanting to jump off a bridge. I've talked to David Koresh. My book was used as the basis for the Netflix Waco series. And, there's challenging people. I've talked to terrorists, hijackers, kidnappers. If we can be effective most of the time with people like that, then surely we could have a decent working relationship with a legislator who is perhaps on the different side of the political agenda. So that's kind of my main spiel for you. Remember, you have to earn the right to be of influence. It doesn't come to you. It didn't come to me because I was the chief hostage negotiator for the FBI. Nobody said, "Oh, Gary's the chief. I got to listen to what he says." No, I wouldn't even use that term. I'd just say, "This is Gary. I'm here to learn what's going on in there, and I'm really concerned about you and your family inside." Now, the perpetrator expects a very authoritative, demanding, commanding voice from law enforcement. You better do this, you better do that, or we're going to come and get you. And instead, they get somebody that says, I really like to learn more about what happened today and to see what I might be able to do to help you get out of this because I hate to see you or your family get hurt. It's softer, it's kinder, it's more empathic. And that's what you want to be if you're going to be successful.